Let us begin and welcome Jason and welcome Shayna. And hello, Max, and hello, Michelle, hello, Elke, hello, Sharon, hello, Alex, and hello, Linda and Al. Hope you're feeling good, Al. Feeling good? Give me a thumbs up. There you go. And David and Joel. All right. Good evening, dear friends. And we are holding in middle of chapter 6. So this is what we're doing today. Now, I want to warn you all that the Alter Rebbe is going to be going deep today. This is deep. The Alter Rebbe is going to launch us into a discussion, into a subject, which will take us through chapter 6, through chapter 7, and through chapter 8. So really, we're about to enter a real solid unit of Tanya. And it's a solid unit also. It's counterintuitive. The Alter Rebbe is really going to be teaching us a new concept, and not just a new concept, but a new way to look at life. The Alter Rebbe wants to train our worldview that we should literally perceive and process the world around us differently than we intuitively do. And because of that, it's the Alter Rebbe has to train us into a new model of thinking, into a spiritual model of how to look at the world. Okay. Let's first set the stage before we jump in. At this point, we've been introduced to our two souls. We have a godly soul, we have an animal soul. A godly soul. Linda, no passing notes in the middle of class, Linda. I'm just kidding. It was genie.com, right? I saw that on the screenshot. Okay. We've learned now about the identity, the structure, the operating system of each of these souls. But this leaves us with something that we really need to learn now from the Alter Rebbe. The godly soul is holy. The animal soul, we've just learned last week, is not holy, unholy, impure, bad. There are a lot of these terms that was used in the beginning of chapter 6. We said that the 10 soul powers of the animal soul are impure. The emotions are bad and impure and unholy. And the garments as well, impure, unholy, and bad. So what does this mean? What about the animal soul is so bad and so impure and so unholy? You know, when we generally hear the words good and bad, that's usually the way we process the world around us. You know, somebody is a good person, somebody's a bad person. What does good and bad mean? I don't know. Good and bad are pretty subjective terms. All right, like, was breakfast good? I don't know. It depends who you ask. Depends on your taste buds, you know. Depends on your culture. I don't know. You know, too spicy is it's all subjective. But you know, there's good and bad. Are you doing good? Is this act good? Is this person good? Or is this act or person bad? And what does good or bad do? It's basically really all about just how we perceive it, how we like it. If we think it's a good thing, we say it's good. If we don't like it, it's not good. Like politicians, what makes a good politician? It's up to debate. Everybody gets to decide. Good or bad is all about what you think. You know, it's all about what makes you feel fuzzy inside. You know, a kid in a moment of anger or in a moment of frustration will say, "You're such a bad mommy, right? Such a bad tati." What makes the mommy bad? Because you took away the knife the kid was running around with? You know, so good and bad are not very good measuring sticks. Like, you know, what's good and what's bad, it's very difficult to define. The same thing goes for morality. You know, what's moral? What's immoral? People think that morality is simple. People think that like we humans intuitively have a sense of morality and a sense of goodness. It's not true. It's really not true. If you look at history, you will see that what is good and what is moral changed. It changes like every 10 years. It's actually quite frightening when you realize how bad humanity is at figuring out what's moral or immoral or good or bad. This is really the story of civilization. There've been generations that living that something was normal and good, and today we look at it, we're like, were these people off their minds? How could anybody think that's good? The most stark example of this, and not to derail the class, but just as an example, is Nazi Germany. An entire people were able to be convinced that murdering Jews was a good thing to do and a moral thing to do. Right? The Nazis weren't a bunch of barbarians. They weren't doing the Holocaust as as a bunch of drunken barbarians. They did it very methodically, very thought out. They did it with a sense of purpose and morality, and this is good for mankind. So, to getting back to the point, these definitions of good and bad, or moral or immoral, really don't leave us with any solid understanding of life. But even more so, good and bad are not binaries. There's so much open space in between them, right? Is your house good or bad? Is your house moral or immoral? I don't know. It's just a house. It's just a house. As long as it's not offending anybody, as long as I didn't, build it on somebody else's property. I don't know. It's just a house. Your breakfast today, was breakfast good or bad? I don't mean tasty. I mean what was this a good force within nature? I don't know. It's just food. I went to Kroger, bought myself some food, made a breakfast. I don't know. Is my exercise good or bad? Is the podcast that I listen to good or bad? I don't know. It's just a podcast. It's just the morning paper. I don't know. 90% of life lives in between the space of good and bad. So the Alter is going to teach us that the way we look at life and the struggle of life, and the struggle between goodness and evil, good and evil, good or bad, we're looking at it the wrong way. We're processing it all the wrong way. And what the Alter is going to want us to do is to take whatever we think the word good means and take whatever we think the word bad or evil means and throw it out the window. Forget it. From now on, there's only holy and not holy. Good means holy. Bad means not holy. And it's a whole new set of definitions. We say that the animal soul is not holy, impure. And to use the Hebrew word, and I want to make sure that by the end of tonight's class, all of you are clear with the Hebrew word. We call it Kelipah. Kelipah. Kelipah means not holy. Kedusha means holy or holiness. Kelipah means not holy. The animal soul is not holy, and the things that it does is not holy. It's impure. So what are we talking about? What are the things that the animal soul does? What are the things that the animal soul is doing, which is so bad and negative and not holy and impure? So the Alter drops us a bombshell. Let's begin reading inside. Bottom of page 66, part 2 of the chapter. Part 2, defining impurity versus holiness. So the Alter says, these impure and unholy behaviors that we speak of is referring to all the things done under the sun, all of them being vanity and the breaking of the spirit. So the Alter says, when you see the words impure and unholy and bad and negative, you could think we're talking about some nefarious, some diabolical, some type of monstrous activities. No, Unholy and negative is referring to all the things done under the sun. Anything your animal soul does out of self-interest, the breakfast you ate, the shower you took this morning, the business you go to, the job you have, the money you make, it is all not holy. It is all Kelipah. In other words, the Alter is saying there's no such thing as neutral. There's no middle ground. Neutrality does not exist from a spiritual perspective. You got to choose holy or not holy. Now, again, this is a bit of a funny statement to make. The Alter has a lot of explaining to do right now, but this is what the Alter establishes. We're not talking only when the animal soul cheats or when the animal soul is being narcissistic. We're talking about the basic stuff of life that is already unholy and impure. Let's keep on reading. Top of page 67. The Zohar, in the Torah portion of Vishalach, explains this verse to mean that all the mundane activities of this world destruct and interrupt the flow of the spirit of holiness to a human soul. Anything. All that's done under the sun is spiritually destructive. The same goes for all talk and all thoughts that, while being ostensibly neutral, are not consciously for the sake of God to fulfill his will or in his service. So the Alter is saying, look, there's only two things. There's holy and there's not holy. Holy is something which is directed for God, for his will, for his service. Anything other than that is not holy, period. And it's not just that it's not holy, it's negative. It's destructive, as we're reading here. And here we conclude, the Alter Rebbe here, this is an important line. That's the meaning of the term Sitra Achara. Sitra Achara is one of the two terms that is used in the language of Kabbalah to describe the opposing forces of holiness. What is opposite holiness? What is unholy? What's impure? It's called Sitra Achara. What does Sitra Achara mean? It means the other side. That's it. It is simply that which is not the side of holiness. So we speak about there's good energy and there's bad energy. There's holy energy and there's anti-holy energy. And what's anti-holy energy? How evil do you need to be? Or how evil does something need to be anti-holiness? And the Alter Rebbe says, very simple, not much. If it's not holy, that's already the problem. So this statement leaves more questions than answers. Number one, what's wrong with my breakfast? I'm just eating breakfast, and here the Alter Rebbe is already giving me a hard time for eating breakfast. What's this business that anything which is not, consciously and directly holy is already a problem? Are we not allowed to be eating breakfast? Is there like a problem in life? What does this even mean? And why is the Alter Rebbe being so harsh on us? Why is anything and everything that the animal soul does so problematic or so, unholy? So the Alter Rebbe is really this is going to launch us into a larger discussion. What does holy even mean? What makes something holy? And once we know what holiness is, we can understand what something which is not holy is. Let's understand the spiritual dynamics of these concepts, holy and not holy. And as we learn them, we're going to see how these concepts are relevant and how understanding this framework of understanding life, of holy and non-holy, is really the key to living a spiritual life. And I'll just tell you right now, it's a lot less scary than it looks like from the outset. Over here, it seems very harsh. Everything is not holy. In a moment, you'll see. And one more point as we move forward. These concepts are going to become clearer and clearer over the next few classes, because the author is going to spend the rest of this chapter explaining it to us, as well as the next chapter. We're going to learn how we interact constantly on a daily basis with stuff which are holy, stuff which are not holy, activities which are holy, activities which are not holy, and we'll see where all that leaves us. So what is holy? What is holiness? What does that mean? When I say something is holy, a person's holy, an activity is holy, what exactly makes it holy? What does holy even mean? So the author says like this: what is holy? The side of holiness is nothing other than a kind of presence and an extension of God's own holiness. God is holy. Wherever God is, wherever there is an extension, an expression, a presence of God, that's holy as well. So wherever there is a presence and extension of God, that's holy. Okay. Now, what gets to have an extension and a presence of God? So the Alter Rebbe says. Now, God's presence rests only upon that which is batel to him. Bittul opens a created entity to God. Bittul. Now, it's interesting because generally in these papers, I always translate words into English, right? And here I am deliberately leaving you with the Hebrew word. A person needs to be batel to God, or bittul. Bittul is a term. I want to spend a few minutes discussing bittul with you. Bittul is a very key term in Jewish spiritual life. And what bittul means is, I'll tell you how they generally translate it, but it's a horrible translation. Bittul is sometimes translated as self-nullification, to nullify oneself to God. Self-abnegation. Or sometimes I see surrender, to surrender oneself to God. That's kind of the gist of it. What does that even mean, to surrender oneself to God? To nullify oneself, like, whoa. What does that even mean? And most importantly, it sounds off. Like there's me and I need to kind of like drop who I am and drop my ego for God, and then what? No more ego, no more me. So what does that mean to have bittul for God? Here's how bittul works. I want to first give you an analogy, and then let's apply that analogy to us and to the world. One of the easiest examples or illustrations of the idea of bittul and what does it mean for an entity to be batel to something else is our own body. The human body is an unbelievably complex machine with billions of cells and hundreds of limbs and body parts, each one with their own functionality, each one with their own capabilities. And the beauty of a body is that it operates as one singular whole. So a body is not like a Lego set where there's hundreds of pieces that happen to be stuck together. The beauty of a body is that every single cell of the body and every limb of the body merges into one unified whole, one unified core. Can you imagine you're a finger, all right? Imagine that you are your index finger. And imagine you as an index finger, all you know is that you're a finger. And you simply don't know that you're part of a whole body. And you run your own agenda. You do whatever you want. This index finger is not connected, is not conscious of the fact it's part of a body. Is that constructive? Is that good? It's not good. The beauty of a body is, as I said, every single part of the body not only works together, but merges into one. You know, what's the first sign that you're not feeling well? Or that there's a certain part of your body that needs medical attention? How do you know when you need to go visit a doctor for something? None of us think about it this way, but you need to go see a doctor. You feel that there's a problem the moment that you feel a specific part of your body. Which means even though you have fingers, you're not supposed to feel your fingers. You're not supposed to feel your hand. Of course, you feel it if you touch it, but you're not meant to feel that you're carrying around 10 fingers. The moment you feel it, that's pain. It's like a sore thumb. Why do I feel it? You don't feel your brain unless you have a headache, right? You don't feel your head unless you have a headache. And you don't feel your nails unless you have an ingrown toenail. That is Bittul. Our body and all the limbs of our body all have Bittul. What does Bittul mean? They transcend their own self and allow a higher force, the unifying force, to lead their life. They allow themselves to be consumed within the unifying force. Your fingers don't have their own agenda. They are directly connected, and they simply allow the unifying power of us to pulse through it. It's plugged into the unifying power. So when our brain and when our soul says, let's move our fingers, there's no resistance. There's no even a delay. There's no lag. It's beautiful. Our fingers move seamlessly the moment we want to. There's no resistance. There's something so. Our fingers are an extension of our soul. The moment we feel it as a thing onto itself, the moment we feel our fingers, we're in trouble. Then there's resistance. Our fingers are not directly connected anymore with that one unifying power. So, what are we saying over here? Bittul is when the one, a singular one, transcends itself and allows itself to be part of the larger whole, or a larger force. Or in other words, when something transcends its own ego. Let's talk about this in terms of us as humans. You know, our sages say a beautiful concept. It's a very deep concept. Our sages say that the same way that our soul fills and pervades the body, so too God fills and pervades the world. So whatever is true about our body, same is true about the world. You know, everything in this world is really part of one organism, is really a part of one unified whole. That one unifying power is God. The problem is that the way we were created, is that we don't really perceive God. We're like a little finger that literally does not realize it's part of a whole body. We're very self-centered. We're very, we're very focused just on our own identity. Bittul is the act of a human being to consciously transcend the ego and to plug in to the one unifying flow, to not resist God's presence, but to allow God's presence and God's energy to flow through him or her. That's Bittul. Bittul is to transcend the ego and allow God to be present and to allow God's energy to extend and flow through you. Now, practically, what does that look like? What does that mean to have Bittul? It's a conscious effort. It takes study. It takes a lot of mindfulness to be mindful. It takes commitment to live a lifestyle where we let go a little bit of our ego and allow ourselves to be seen and to see ourselves as an expression of God and as an extension to God, and to try to live a little bit in that mode. To live in the space that we are one with God, in a space that we are part of one unifying whole. As long as we don't have Bittul, we are in a state of resistance to the unifying force of creation. We are in a state of resistance to God. We are blocking God. Just like a finger when it hurts and it doesn't really move well, right? It's resisting. It is not allowing the body and the soul's energy to simply flow through it and to allow it to function as part of the unified whole. The same thing, when we don't have Bittul, when our ego is holding us tight in, it resists, it blocks the presence of God to be present and revealed within us. When we have Bittul and we allow God to be present and we allow God to flow and we don't have resistance, we don't pose a resistance, and God is able to flow within us, then God's holiness is within us and then we become holy. And the same is true not just for people, but about things in general. We'll talk about that in a moment. So Bittul is what allows a creation which is inherently self-centered, inherently created with an ego. But if we could transcend that ego even a little bit, we allow the light of God in. And that makes us holy. And that will make anything holy. Is this cup holy? The answer is no. Because this cup does not have an awareness of God. So even though it's part of the whole, part of the unified whole, it poses a resistance. It blocks the expression of God. That's how it works. Everything in creation was designed, was made, that on the one hand, it was created by God. But on the other hand, the way God created is that it doesn't really feel, and it doesn't give off a sense that it's an expression of God and that it's an extension of God. But this is the key idea. Bittul allows the flow of divine presence to flow through you. And when divine holy presence flows through you, then you are holy, just like God. Because God now is present and is extended within you. Let's keep on reading. Now, what does this bittul look like? What type of bittul does it need to be? So the Alter Rebbe says, it could be an active, conscious bittul, as is the case with the supernal angels. Angels. What are the angels, right? There's an angel which we call Michael. There's the angel Gabriel. All types of angels it speaks about, right? We welcome the Shabbos angels every Friday night when we sing Shalom Aleichem, right? Shalom Aleichem. Malachei Hasharis, right? The supernal angels. So angels don't have a sense of ego like we do. By us, from the moment we're born, we're very in tune to our egos. And our egos is really the strongest presence in our life. What do I want? What do I not want? What do I like? What makes me feel good today? What are my instinctual drives? If you would ask an angel, say, tell me, angel, do you ever get burnout from working for God? Do you ever get burnout? Or angel, what are your favorite hobbies? The angel will say, I don't even know what you're talking about. Hobbies? Like, it's not that it doesn't have hobbies. It's that it doesn't even think like that way. What's your favorite restaurant to go to? What are you even talking about? An angel, all it knows and all it feels is that it is an extension of God. And while it is an existence, an independent existence, it doesn't feel itself with a sense of ego. I have this, and I like this, and I do this, and that, and I'm too busy to do. There's no I. It's a transcendent being which has bittul. So angels always have bittul, and the presence of God is always revealed within them, and the angels are therefore holy. So angels are always holy, and and there are probably some people walking planet Earth which are like angels. No, very few people, but great tzaddikim, great righteous people, which lived with such a sense of bittul, such a sense of devotion to God. They were so plugged in, they didn't have their own agenda. It's not that they listened to God. They were so naturally plugged in. So the Alter says if something has an actual conscious bittul, that's holy. But the Alter now says, and this is not so directly important for the flow here, but it's a beautiful insight that the Alter adds now. Let's read. Or could even be a potential bittul, as with every Jew. Since every Jewish person is capable of actual bittul to God by giving his or her life for the sanctification of God's name. So this is a theme that the Alter Rebbe really loves. And you can tell in Tanya, there are certain ideas that the Alter Rebbe, he really loves them. And the Alter Rebbe, we know, was a lover of Jews. He really loved Jews. The previous Rebbe, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, he wrote once, I once read it, it was such a beautiful description. He says, every single page of Tanya is brimming with the Alter Rebbe's love for a fellow Jew. The Alter Rebbe loved Jews, and you see it in Tanya. And here's one of those examples. The Alter Rebbe says, every Jew is holy, because every Jew has bittul. What? Every Jew has bittul? Me and you, are we really living in that right mindset where we have this humility and we transcend our own egos and we're connected to God on a deep level? We have that. Every Jew has that. So the Alter Rebbe says, no, not necessarily. But every Jew has it in potential, which means there's a pilot light that's on always in every single Jew. And even though maybe we don't have a conscious bittul, in a single moment, Jews have proven that we really have a potential bittul that is accessible at any moment. And the Alter Rebbe proves this thesis by a fact, which is really such an extraordinary fact of Jewish history. Jewish history has proven something which is really outstanding. It's unbelievable that Jews, every Jew, man, woman, child, scholar and simpleton, religious or totally secular, when push comes to shove, will sacrifice their life for God, will give up their life for God. What we call self-sacrifice, or the sanctification of God's name. Now, if you're going to tell me that the religious Jews, very religious Jews, or great rabbis, or the big fanatics would give up their life for God, that's not such an exceptional thing, because in every religion you can find that. Right? The Muslims are very good at raising fanatics who could blow themselves up for their beliefs. So what the Alter Rebbe points to is the not religious Jews. Throughout history, there were many Jews who weren't religious, who didn't care about religion, didn't care about God, never made God a priority in their life. And it was those Jews that in a moment of truth would say, I'd rather die than give up God. And we saw this in the Spanish Inquisition. We've seen this in the pogroms, the Chmielnicki pogroms. There are so many anecdotes and such beautiful stories from the Holocaust, where you see even Jews who were the capos and they became the enemies of their own people. But in a moment of truth, all of a sudden, they would give up their life for a fellow Jew or give up their life for God. Where you saw that in the essence of a Jew and God is one. And a Jew is really always Bittul. If you just peel back the layers, you'll see that every Jew has Bittul. And in recent times, an example of this is Daniel Pearl. Right? Daniel Pearl, what year was it? That he was caught in Afghanistan. He was a Jewish reporter, I believe, for the New York Times. Am I correct on this? And he was absolutely secular. He was not a Jew you would call a devout Jew in any. And he famously said the words, 2003. Yeah, thank you, Max. And he said the words, "I was born a Jew, I will die as a Jew," something like that, right? What were the exact? Like unbelievable words. Like these are your final words of pride. Like you see that in a moment of truth, even the Jew that you would think is so disconnected, they're one with God. And they cannot deny that oneness when there's a moment of clarity. And, another example is Ed Koch. Ed Koch, right, the former mayor of New York City, and also a very secular Jew and a Jew. I wasn't alive then, but I always heard that Ed Koch, when he was in office, it wasn't good years for the Jews. He did not have a lot of sympathy for Jewish causes. There were a lot of benefits and protections that the Jewish community developed over the years in New York City, especially because of anti-Semitism. And for some reason he was, thank you, Max. There we go. Thank you. My mother's a Jew, my father's a Jew, and I'm a Jew. Right? Unbelievable words. So Ed Koch was Ed Koch, he wanted to be buried in Manhattan. There's no Jewish cemetery in Manhattan. So you know where Ed Koch is buried? In a church, in a churchyard. Can you imagine? A Jew was buried in a churchyard. But what did he write on his tombstone? Ed Koch's tombstone says Ed Koch, his year, says the former mayor of New York City. And then it has in quotation marks the words of Daniel Pearl. My mother's a Jew, my father's a Jew, I'm a Jew. And then it has the words Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And it makes no sense. What does Ed Koch have business having that type of Jewish pride? But what do we see? We see that don't underestimate the power of a Jewish soul. A Jew is holy. A Jew is really holy. And this is what the author is saying, that a Jew is holy because he has a godly soul. And that godly soul is always directly in touch with God, has this bittul, and is always connected. The pulse of God is always there. And the Alter Rebbe continues. And that is why the sages of the Talmud said that even when a single Jew sits and studies Torah, God's presence rests on him. What does it take for God's presence to be there by a Jew? Even one Jew, you study Torah, God's there. Now, we're not talking about a Jew who studies Torah with the right intentions. Any Jew, you read it, you pick up a Torah book in your living room at night, whatever, you read it and you study, God's right there automatically. Because a Jew, because of their godly soul, always has that bittul. And even more so, let's continue reading, and even more so, upon any assembly of 10 Jews, God's presence will always rest, which is an unbelievable statement. You have 10 Jews in a room. 10 Jews in a room. Wow. Thank you, Alex. Right, baptized Jew, and on his deathbed he says Shema. And you see this throughout history. The Jewish soul never disappoints. That's what the author is saying. So every Jew is holy because God is always present within a Jew, because the Jew always has bittul, even if he or she doesn't know it, but it's always there. And with a 3,000 plus year track record, we could all know that we really, somewhere within our own soul, somewhere just under the surface, whether we know it or believe it or feel it or acknowledge it, there's a place within us where us and God are absolutely one, and it's a point of life that we can never deny on that space of truth. But the Alter Rebbe says like this: 10 Jews. If 10 Jews are together, that's a holy environment. God is there. But what if those 10 Jews are playing poker? Doesn't matter. God's there. What if they're playing golf? God. 10 Jews, because every Jew is holy, 10 Jews, doesn't matter what they're doing, the presence of God is there. It's a holy environment, which is actually why the sages say that when 10 Jews get together, you got to be very careful. Got to make sure that you're doing appropriate things, because every Jew brings along the presence of God with them. So this is Bittul. This is holiness. What is holy? This is the definition of holiness. Holy is something where God is revealed, is present. God could extend himself there. It's a space where God can flow within. There's no resistance to God's truth there. That is holy. So what's not holy? What's Kelipah? Let's turn to page 68. What's the other side? What's Kelipah? So the Alter Rebbe says like this: Kelipah is anything which resists, where there's a sense of ego. And that ego doesn't allow God's holiness, God's presence to be present. Let's read. The other side, Kelipah. But anything that lacks this bittul, to him, perceiving itself with a sense of ego as a separate entity of its own, can't receive its life energy from God's holiness. It can't connect to the inner track of holiness, to the essence of holiness as it stands for itself. So something that has bittul, God and a holy divine energy pulses through him. And we could become a vessel, a medium for holy energy in the world, in our environment. Holiness spills out through us. God spills out through us. But anything, anybody that doesn't have bittul, there's a sense of ego. It sees itself as a separate entity unto itself. It blocks, it resists, it doesn't allow God's presence. It doesn't allow the purity of God's presence to be revealed. And what's their energy? If they don't have holy energy within them, then they have what the Alter is going to call Kelipah energy, unholy energy. And the Alter is going to explain this to us. And I want to preface something. And this is an important point here. You know, I'm not that big. I've never done studies into comparative religions and comparative philosophies. But to my understanding, and especially Christianity, there's a belief that there's a God, the Lord, a supreme being who's the source of all good. But then other religions also believe in other forces at play, like the Satan, right? Satanic powers. And these satanic powers have power within the world and could do harm. And there becomes this type of competition between God and evil forces. Like there's another force that God has to contend with. So then life becomes about choosing God's side and helping God out in his fight with the forces of evil. Judaism says absolutely not. There's only one God. There's only one force at play. Everything is God. So where does evil come from? Judaism says even evil comes from God. And even the forces in nature that are anti-God, that are unholy, even that's from God. Because God, that's how God designed the world. Like we learned at the beginning of the chapter, God created one opposite the other. There's an equilibrium. God wants there to be opposing forces in nature. Everything is God. The difference is things that are designed to be holy, God's energy is given directly. And the holiness and the presence of God could be felt there. in that person or in that object or in that moment. But anything which is designed to be distant and separated and not in tune from God is created in a different way. And I want to read this with you. Let's read inside. This leaves us with the question: where does such an entity derive its spiritual energy and life force from, if not from God? God creates everything. Not only did God create everything in the 6 days of creation, God is sustaining everything right now. God is creating as an active player in everything. This cup is only here because God created it and is creating it right now. Every moment of life needs constant creation and constant renewal. So this cup has God as much as a Torah scroll has the energy of God within it. So what's the difference? Here's the difference. Let's read. Rather, anything which is not holy, anything that resists God, has to receive its life force from an outer track of divine energy. What does that mean? Let's read. This is very interesting. The divine light and life energy descends from its initial holy source, one level to the next, for myriads of levels in the great chain of worlds, on a path of cause and effect and multiple condensations of energy. Right. This all makes a lot of sense to you all, right? Okay, good. Until that divine energy becomes so repeatedly diluted and diminished that it is capable of squeezing itself and investing itself as a foreign entity trapped within this self-declared autonomous being. So God's energy comes into this world in two ways. If something has bittul, and if something allows God to be present within, then God's energy flows directly. And you could feel the holiness and the divinity of this energy and of this created being. When you went to the holy temple in Jerusalem, you didn't have to believe that it's holy. You felt that it's holy. You felt God's presence here. When something is holy, God, it's direct energy. But the Alter is saying, if something is not holy, if something is Kelipah, God is still the source of energy. But God does this entire process, which basically diminishes and dilutes the divine energy, that by the time this energy gives life to this creation, the DNA, the holy energy is totally lost. And therefore, that created entity doesn't feel that it's an extension of God. That's really the way Kelipah is made. That God takes his holy energy and goes through this entire process of diluting it and diminishing it and stripping it of its divine nature, masking its divine origin until it's energy that creates life, but it's a life that is in total denial of the nature of its life, that its life comes from God. This is how, let's read. This is how divine energy, can provide a barely sufficient charge of life energy to sustain this thing's continuous regeneration out of the nothingness. Just enough that it will not revert to the absolute null state that preceded its creation. So God has to be creating everything constantly. But again, if it's a holy thing, which allows God's presence to be within, then the divine energy flows directly. And if not, if it's Kelipah, then it's a diluted energy that masks the divine source. And that is why within our world, everything is an extension of God and everything has divine energy in it, but you don't see it. This microphone here, you don't see that it's divine energy. You want to know why? Because it's Kelipah. That's how God makes it. God hides the source of energy. You know, the difference is, if you ask a fish in the ocean, what's your relationship with water? Every fish is it's so clear to them that water is life. I need water. I can't leave water. On land, we also need oxygen, we need air, but it's invisible. It's a little bit harder to see. So that's like two consciousnesses. One is you can be so conscious of the presence of God and of how connected you are with God that it's like water. And another one is like, you need it and it's all over, but you're just in total denial of it. You just don't even realize it. You're just running your life. You don't even sense that there's God there. And that's how God made the world. God made the world to be Kelipah. So now we have a definition. Holy means that there's a state of Bittul here. This object or this person or this activity is not an ego-based activity, but it's allowing God's energy to flow in. It's opening itself up to God. It's allowing itself to be seen within the context, the larger context of the unifying power of creation, and therefore it's holy. God's holiness can pulse through it. Kelipah are the things and the people and the activities which are ego-based, which resist and mask the presence of God. So what would you say our world is? Our physical world that we inhabit. Is our world a world of holiness or of Kelipah? What do you say? What do you say, Joel? Based on what we said. Yeah, what do you say? Unmute.
Kelipah.
Kelipah. Why Kelipah?
Because not everything that goes on in the world is related to it has to do with the holiness of God.
Right. If you walk around, a dollar bill doesn't tell you this is God. This is part of God's universe. Right. A dollar bill tells you this is good money that you could use, or you could invest, and you could make money with, and you could. Everything in this world is ego-based. The number one rule of every biological living life is that it wants to self-perpetuate itself, even to the detriment of other creations. Every single physical object which grows and has life is looking to survive, is looking to express its ego, express its sense of self. Human, animal, vegetation, botanical life. It's all ego-based. We're in a world full of Kelipah. The reality that we inhabit, that our souls inhabit when we are in bodies, is an environment of Kelipah. Everything in this world is masking God. Everything in this world is by default resisting the presence of God. From a blade of grass to a wicked person. It's really all the same thing. It's masking the presence of God. And with this, let's conclude. Let's read. We're on the bottom of page 68. Now, this is why. Now we can understand why this physical world and all it contains is called the world of Kelipos and Sitra Achara. And page 69, next page, and that's why everything that happens in this world is harsh and evil, and the wicked dominate it. This is a quote from the Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is a very Kabbalistic work, a classical Kabbalistic work, right? As written in Eitz Chaim, section 42 at the end of chapter 4. It says there, everything in this world is harsh and evil and wicked. If you read it, if you read this sentence without context, you could say, what? Everything in this world is harsh and evil? That's a pretty dark description. And is it even true? A lot of evil happens in this world. A lot of bad happens in this world. But everything is evil? Is the majority of this world evil? What type of language is this? But the author is saying you have to understand the language of Kabbalah. Evil means a lack of godliness. Harsh means a lack of godliness. Wicked means a lack of godliness. What does good mean? Good means there's God here. The opposite of good means there's no God here. No good, no God. Right? Just add one O. Good and God is synonymous. If God is not here, it's bad. It's wicked. It's dark. The world is in denial. The Alter says, now we understand the language. And with this, dear friends, this is the first leg of a journey of seeing life differently. The act of breakfast in the morning is Kelipah. You want to know why? Because your animal soul is exerting, and it's not exerting, I apologize, is asserting its ego. I'm hungry. Let's go eat.
What if you say your prayer to your food?
Very good. Dr. Lieb is saying, but maybe we could change. Maybe we can make breakfast holy. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. But by default, yeah, go ahead.
Isn't sustaining your body is God's commandment, and food is one way to sustain your body?
Yeah. So if you eat breakfast from the perspective of your godly soul, which means we need to live and God wants me to live, so we're going to eat breakfast for God, then breakfast would be holy. But when breakfast is an act of asserting my ego, what do I like? What do I not like? And then we press our face. And then I want money. Why do you want money? Because what do you mean? I have bills. I need money. I need money.
What about if I need money to make tzedakah?
Again, if you really go to work and live with that attitude, then that means your godly soul is working, not your animal soul. That means the work is not the activity of your ego, it's the activity of your mission. And then it could be whole.
Providing for your family is not godly work?
Again, it's all about intention. Is this an expression of your animal soul? If it's an expression of your animal soul, then it's your ego and it's Kelipah. Again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying you should go hungry. Don't skip breakfast because Rabbi Dubov said breakfast is Kelipah. Eat breakfast. But this is telling us the reality. If it's an expression of your ego, that means there's no Bittul here. And that means that this activity right now is Kelipah. Now, we're going to get there. We still have a long way to go. Eating and drinking, and even drinking fine wine. And, all these could be holy activities. But basically, we have two souls. One soul is engaged in holy activities. One soul is engaged in Kelipah activities because it's an ego. It's just the expression, it's the assertion of me and the I and the ego. And that assertion of the ego, anything that ego does is Kelipah. Now, where this will take us, we still have a way to go. So we still have a long journey to finish this chapter. And chapter 7, we'll learn a little bit more about Kelipah. And we still didn't really learn about our interactions with Kelipah. What does that mean? Is that a problem? Should we be changing something? And what we're going to see is that a lot of Kelipah that we come into contact with in our life, we can make holy. And that's really the key of living a holy spiritual life. But let's not jump the gun. We're going to get there. But right now, we learned about holiness. We learned what not holy is. We also now have a new spiritual term called Bittul, to be batel. It's a very important term. And with that, we conclude tonight. I want to thank you all. I want to wish you all a wonderful night.